and they don't expand it into the actual stuff we're researching. They never touch the good shit.
No.
You know?
It's because it all comes from being triggered. So they get triggered about certain things. That's an engineer.
That's why AEWAR is annoying, because it's like he's not doing any real research. He's latching on these little details that mean nothing. It's like he'll say, "I found they never had they always talk about the same thing." You know, the World's Fairs. It's like clearly they had trains. We're like,
what do you mean? Of course, he's trying to hyper-focus on, like, it's hyper-focus on.
He was harping about this the other day. It was kind of just annoying. Talking about, the World's Fairs, they don't have any mud flood winter. So what are you talking about?
Well, what about the Suez Canal? They say they dug that out.
These guys are nice.
But there's pictures of the construction maps from the 1600s.
I don't know. They are going into it, and
it's a weird interview. They're just idiots. They're around.
Everything we need
to listen to. If you get him back by 30 more reasons, he's still doing what he's still plenty of people. God, his wife must be annoying. Or maybe she can take it off and take it to work. Who knows? But yeah, right.
And that annoys me about I call them the skeptards, by the way.
No, the canals.
The what?
That's the big part. The canals. Like, show me just one picture of any of these canals, because that's the most advanced part to build, and the most amount of terraforming and resources and just ludicrousness of it all.
So the canals are an example where the Tartarian advocates are either lying or they have yet to do proper research on the subjects, and they're just repeating an argument without actually executing any due diligence on it. And I've done this myself, so I know how it works. So let's talk about the Erie Canal first. So the first thing with the Erie Canal is originally it was completed in 1825, so really early on in the 19th century. And construction was authorized in 1817. So that's about 8 years. And it's 584 kilometers long. So it's really long. But, as we go down here, in 1918, the canal was replaced by the larger New York State Barge Canal. This new canal replaced much of the original route. And what that tells us is that in, less than 100 years, they've replaced the entire thing. So the original couldn't have been that good, because we have canals in Britain that date back to their inception. They're not all superseded. And so the New York State Canal System, and construction started on this in 1905, so beginning of the 20th century. It was completed in 1918. And this is a big improvement on the original Erie Canal. And the problem is, we do have a wealth of documentation detailing this construction, this upgrade that replaced the entire Erie Canal. So we have in the archives, we have 1,393 documents of this build. And you can just scroll through these. Most of them are photographs, but there's also surveys, letters, plans, maps. There's a lot of information. So let's just go through a few of these, because again, we're in the 20th century and there's a steam excavator. Look at all this land it's moving. And there's a lot of timber, and we've got these railways. Steam shovel. You can see here where they're extending this, they're cutting the land. They've got these temporary tracks coming in for all the gear. And they're doing it. You can see the machines in operation. This is a machine hoisting material out of the lock. These photos exist in abundance.
Well, and that's the best part is they can go ahead and say that these are fake. That's not the point that is being made here. The point that is being made here is there was a request to show one photo, and it did not take us long to do that. And you guys have had years to find these photos.
Exactly. And these do not look fake. The detail is outstanding. From the timber, everything, the locks being built, all the temporary tracks, all the machinery. You'd have to debunk all these photographs. This is a pile driver, more industrial revolution technology, building locks, temporary tracks up here again, steam cranes.
And all it is it's a trench. It's not some extreme piece of engineering. They're digging a trench in the ground. It's just going to run for miles. That's the part that I guess blows their mind.
And this is an important photograph because this is a channeler. And these were around throughout the 19th century. And what it's doing, it's making vertical cuts on these walls that line each side of the canal. And then it's used to smooth the walls out. So if you ever think, how did they do this? They must have had machines. They did. They cut this wall and then they smooth it. That's an important machine. Look at the locks. So this isn't just a little repair job. They replace pretty much the entire route. Again, look, with their shovels, they're digging. They've got machines, but they're still digging. It's all wood. And look at the land, the earthworks as well, because that's important, not just for the canals, but for the other arguments in the Tartaria hypothesis. This doesn't look old. It looks new. Look at the land by the houses. Excavation by steam shovel. Look at the land. Look at the earthworks. Look at all the timber, all the scaffolding. These do not look like fake photographs.
Again, that's not even relevant at this point because they said just show us one photo. So they can go the route of being fake. None of them have any experience in professional photography. That's been made abundantly clear. The point is, these didn't exist. Here they are.
Exactly. So if you're saying you can't find one photograph, again, it comes down to two things. One, you're lying, or two, you have a deficiency when it comes to research aptitude. And you need to decide which one that is.
And so those are the archives that you found. I did some digging myself, and I came across New York Heritage Digital Collections, and there are tons upon tons of photographs of the Erie Canal and of this reconstruction of the Erie Canal. And this is one of the photos that I pulled where we have this boat with a steam crane on it, and it's just digging up as it goes, making the trench deeper and deeper. And if it gets stuck, it's just going to dig and the water is going to just flow right around it. It's going to lift it up and it's going to keep moving. So I was able to find photos just as AEWAR was able to find photos. He found them on one site. I found them on another. So that's now two people that had no problem finding one photograph.
And yeah, that's a good point, actually, because different archives can have different photographs and documents of the same build or same event or whatnot. And the Erie Canal is not the only canal that we have documented. We also have ones from the 19th century. So these are images from the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal that was built in the 1890s. And these are interesting. So we're at the end of the 19th century now. So we have industrial revolution technology, big time. Look at these cranes. Can you see that there? That's a channeler. Again, that machine from earlier, lining the wall, flattening it out. We've got steam excavators loading the earth onto these carts, which are being hauled out. More images, digging away, moving vast amount of land. Look at these crane pulley mechanisms, these systems up here. That's all wood. I mean, look at this stuff. To say that there's not one image or any images and to say these are fake is insane. And this is a great image as well because you can see the scale of these cranes and this machinery. And again, you can see the channelers there. This is why these walls are so smooth and flat, because of this technology. Yeah, look, rubble being hauled up, rubble being loaded, land being cleared. You've got steam technology back there, horses on site. And this is going to get interesting because, again, you can see the scale of this in the 1890s, all the people work, but you can also see the scale here of this land. And it has something to do with this machine. What it's doing is it's moving all this rubble and land and actually stockpiling it here. So this is that machine I was talking about. It's a cantilever incline machine. It's used to move broken rock from the excavation areas to the spoil piles. So these spoil piles in the distance, and they're massive. You can see that's a horse there. Look how big they are. Look at this machine. And this is in 1890. A lot of the buildings that people say, oh, it just took 1 to 3 years to build, were put up in the 1890s. And look at this infrastructure. Look at this technology, this construction technology. It's sophisticated, very sophisticated. And you can see here, look, channelers in action, all the land being moved, the tiers here. And these are the stockpiles, and they're huge, all this rubble. And that's a channeler close up. It's another view of it. Channeler against the wall up there. And this is a compressed air rock drill. So they would use these and then put dynamite down there to blow apart the rubble and then be able to clear it. Yep, drilling holes for dynamite. This is how they did it. There's a dynamite and there's an explosion, the dynamite going off.
Great photo. I bet the photographer loved that one.
It must have been pretty intense working in these on these canals, doing all this stuff. Pretty exhilarating, blowing stuff up. And yeah, a steam-powered trench excavator. Look at all this earth. So I can already hear the pushback and saying, okay, that's fine. They replaced the Erie Canal and we've got that construction. And great in the 19th century when we've got all this industrial revolution, infrastructure and construction technology. But what about before? So the original Erie Canal was the early 19th century. And a lot of this technology did exist, but they wouldn't have had access to as much of it. And that's correct. And what about 18th century Britain, the canals in the 1700s? Because, so much of the country was made navigable, if that's the right word, via the canal. So they were all built then. So how did they do it then when they didn't have these machines? To which I'd answer, and I'm gonna show you in a minute, but the first thing to say about it is that a lot of the canals in Britain, they were built by the British, but they were also built by Irish labourers that were credited with, the infrastructure such as canals, railways, docks, harbours, roads, a lot of it. And when you look into these, they call them the navvies. Up to a century before the Great Famine of 1845, 100,000 migrants a year made the journey back and forth across the Irish Sea. And the Irish were respected for their drain digging skills. They could dig by hand, a lot of soil excavation, all manually. They were renowned for it. And they say in 1845, when the railways were being built, 200,000 navvies were employed in Britain. And that's 40,000 more than the military at that time.
I was born there in 1876. That's my home. I worked on the canal from I was 13 at various jobs, wagon greasing, point turning, nippering for gangs and all that. I went down there and asked him, his name was Tom Wiltshire, for a job. Yes, he said, I'll give you a job, lad. He said, you can go into the cripple yard there, he said, grease them wagons after they've finished them. I said, all right. So I went there.
Oh, we had hundreds of Irishmen on the canal. Yeah. Hard workers and all. Oh, they had to work or else get out. Oh, with plenty of Irishmen from one end to the other.
And when they were building the Erie Canal, the original one, a vast portion of the manpower were Irish immigrants. And that's one thing that's really good that kind of unites the UK and America is the Irish heritage that we share. And the Irish are fantastic stonemasons. It's in their blood. They've developed they had a whole sort of language that the stonemasons used to speak. And this goes back to the Celts. these people, it's kind of passed down, these skills and talents for this kind of construction. But that's not going to be enough. So I wanted to use a final example of how this is possible by just manual labor. So in the 1930s, in Soviet Russia, in the gulags, you could call them slaves in the labor camp, were utilized to build the White Sea Baltic Canal. And beginning and ending with a labor force of 126,000. And apparently almost 25,000 laborers died doing this. But this canal is 227 kilometers. So it's not as big as the Erie, but the entire canal was constructed in 20 months between 31 and 33, almost entirely by manual labor. They were putting these people to work. They were like slaves, right? And I'm going to show you. And yeah, here it is. Digging. All by hand into carts on temporary tracks that can move it out. And this is very famous. And this is well documented. And this is the 1930s. And it was all done by hand, manual labor. They didn't have the machines they were using in America in the 1890s or the 1870s. They were doing it, look, moving all the rubble, all this temporary timber down to make things more navigable. This is a canal done by hand. And these are women. Again, this is women digging. I'm curious to know how many of the Tartarian advocates have ever done any labor work or ever dug anything. Because you're saying it's impossible, but do you even have a baseline for how possible construction is in a time frame? Because I don't think you do. I haven't seen a reasonable baseline proposed for construction yet. And this proves that they could do it by hand. Like they're wheeling all this stuff. They haven't got machines here hauling all their dirt and rubble. They're doing this all by hand. And it took them 2 years to build, 200 kilometers. So the Erie Canal, early in the 19th century, in 8 years, at 500 kilometers, with a strong and very big workforce, and a lot of them made up of Irish migrants who are skilled in this trade, isn't impossible. And to say you can't find any construction images, it's absurd.